From the moment he is created, Lemongrab exists as a mistake that should not have been made, yet could never have been avoided. In a world as fluid and alive as Ooh, where candy people breathe and reason, where life sprouts from sugar and imagination, he stands as something brittle, shrill, and painfully aware of his own wrongness. Princess Bubblegum made him not out of malice but necessity, the compulsion to create, to bring order to chaos, to externalize the perfectionism that rules her mind. And so Lemongrab becomes that perfectionism given form. He is the echo of a ruler's self-doubt, molded in citrus flesh. When he first opens his eyes, the world greets him with a silence that he immediately shatters. His voice is not simply loud, it is the sound of rejection itself, an alarm against existence. Everything he feels is too much, too bright, too wrong, too alive. His senses are raw nerves. Even the softest gesture reads to him as an intrusion. He screams because the world screams inside him. Lemongrab's birth is not a joyful event. It is the instant self-awareness of imperfection. From the beginning, he knows he is unacceptable. Yet beneath the shrill noise lies tragedy. Because Lemongrab was never designed to be whole, his every act of cruelty is an attempt to locate a missing piece. He tries to rule others because he cannot rule himself. He seeks control because he has never felt safe. The citizens he governs are not people to him, but reflections of the chaos within, each one a fragment he cannot quiet. When they fail to meet his impossible standards, he punishes them as he wishes someone had corrected him. In his mind, punishment equals structure. Structure equals safety. This is the logic of a soul built in fear. Lemongrab's loneliness is absolute. Unlike most of Ooh's creatures, he is not born into friendship, love, or even play. He comes into being fully grown, yet emotionally infantile, lacking the years of tenderness that teach one how to live among others. His world begins empty and stays that way. The castle Lemongrab is not just his home, but his echo chamber, a kingdom of silence where only his voice resounds. When he declares things unacceptable, what he truly means is that he cannot accept himself. Each decree is a cry for meaning, a desperate attempt to make sense of a life built on accident. It is tempting to laugh at Lemongrab, and many do. His stiffness, his piercing tone, his absurdity, they make him easy to mock. But beneath the comedy lies the purest sadness Adventure Time ever portrayed. For in Lemongrab, we witness what happens when someone is created without love, yet expected to behave as if they understand it. He does not know kindness because he has never received it. He cannot mirror compassion because none has been shown to him. Every attempt he makes to connect ends in fear or anger. He is the embodiment of emotional illiteracy, a being desperate for affection, yet incapable of recognizing it when it arrives. His relationship to Princess Bubblegum forms the root of both his suffering and his significance. To her, he is a failure, but a necessary one. He reveals the limits of her control, the shadow of her perfection. Lemongrab carries her flaws so she can appear flawless. This is why she cannot destroy him. To undo him would be to deny a part of herself. And so she keeps him alive, at a distance, forever the reminder that perfection cannot exist without pain. Lemongrab's existence becomes her confession, his screams her conscience. But something in Lemongrab resists being just a reflection. Beneath his fragility lives a stubborn spark of will, the instinct to survive, even to define himself. This is what separates him from being merely a failed experiment. The very intensity that isolates him also gives him agency. When he demands obedience, he is trying to shape a world that doesn't terrify him. When he lashes out, he is fighting back against the creator who abandoned him. Every unacceptable is a prayer disguised as rage. Please make the world make sense. There is also innocence in him, though it hides under the noise. Lemongrab does not manipulate others for pleasure. His cruelty is clumsy, almost childlike, as though he is acting out rules he barely understands. He believes in fairness, but his version of fairness is absolute control, because that is all he knows. When his subjects disobey, he feels betrayed, not because he craves power, but because he interprets difference as danger. For Lemongrab, to love someone would mean to risk the unpredictable, and that is unbearable. Better to dominate than to be abandoned. In the quiet moments, rare but real, Lemongrab reveals the faint outline of tenderness. He cares for his lemon subjects, however awkwardly. He constructs order, feeds them, even crafts art in his strange way. There are glimpses of creativity buried under the discipline. He is not devoid of imagination. He simply mistrusts it. To imagine freely would mean confronting the chaos within, so he buries his creativity beneath rules. Yet his very creation of a society, however twisted, hints at the same impulse that drives his creator to make meaning from nothing. The first half of Lemongrab's story is thus a cycle of screaming and silence, of punishment and confusion. But if we look deeper, it mirrors something profoundly human, the cycle of rejection and longing. Every person who has ever felt unworthy understands a fragment of Lemongrab's despair. He is the embodiment of the inner voice that tells us we are too strange, too loud, too much. The difference is that Lemongrab's voice is externalized, audible, inescapable. He cannot hide his pain behind politeness. His suffering becomes performance. In this sense, he is pure honesty, an unfiltered expression of anxiety. Adventure Time often disguises truth in absurdity, and Lemongrab is perhaps its purest metaphor for emotional distortion. He is the sound of trauma echoing without interpretation. The lemon flesh, the distorted features, the voice that breaks every moment of quiet, all serve to externalize the discomfort we try to suppress. When we laugh at him, we are laughing at ourselves, at the parts of our minds that can't stop yelling that nothing fits. His existence is both comedy and confession. What begins to shift Lemongrab's fate is not an event but a realization. That isolation cannot sustain him. His castle, his rules, his punishments, none of it silences the noise. The emptiness grows. It is this hollowness that first drives him to seek companionship, even if it must be of his own making. He believes that if he can replicate himself, he can finally be understood. It is a desperate kind of self-love, but it marks the first flicker of change. For the first time, Lemongrab's need turns outward, toward connection, however misguided. The seed of redemption lies there, in the desire to not be alone. Lemongrab's creation of another version of himself, his twin, his mirror, his other half, is not merely a plot twist, but a spiritual event. In making a copy, he confronts the possibility that his problem was never external. He meets himself, literally. The encounter forces him to see that what he despises in others is what he cannot bear within. The clone's existence exposes both his yearning for empathy and his terror of it. He wants to be loved, but cannot stand equality. The other Lemongrab becomes both salvation and threat, the embodiment of intimacy that he cannot yet handle. This, too, mirrors human experience. When we seek understanding, we often meet ourselves in others, and that recognition can be unbearable. Lemongrab's screams at his double are the screams of anyone who fears vulnerability. Yet through this confrontation, something subtle changes. For the first time, He experiences affection, warped, jealous, unstable, but real. The two Lemongrabs share a bond that no one else can comprehend. In their strange coexistence, a kind of love begins to grow, fragile and painful. It is not peace, but it is connection, and connection is the first step toward redemption. Lemongrab's birth, then, is not just his physical creation, but the beginning of a long, uneven awakening. He starts as noise and ends, someday, as something almost capable of music. His story is a meditation on the long path from fear to understanding, from isolation to empathy. He will fail many times. He will hurt others and himself. But even in his failures, he teaches us something sacred, that the wish to be accepted, however clumsy, is the root of all change. As we close this first chapter, imagine him standing alone in his sterile castle, lit by the faint glow of lemon walls. His face is twisted, his body trembling with emotion he cannot name. Outside, the world of Ooh hums with laughter, adventure, and colour. But inside the castle, there is only one voice, sharp, uncertain, alive. It cries out not in anger, but in longing. The cry echoes through the corridors, bouncing endlessly off the walls that he built to protect himself. It is the sound of someone learning, for the first time, that existence hurts because it means you are real. And in that terrible, beautiful noise, his first act of creation, his first act of despair, Lemongrab begins. There comes a moment in every lonely being's life when solitude becomes unbearable. For Lemongrab, that moment arrives not as quiet despair, but as a sharp, splitting thought, I need another me. It is not affection that drives this impulse, but survival. The silence in his castle is too complete, too reflective. His own voice has nowhere to land. Every scream bounces back at him, amplifying the emptiness until it becomes a kind of madness. In this endless feedback loop, Lemongrab concludes that the only way to be understood is to duplicate himself. After all, if no one in Ooh can tolerate him, perhaps only he can. When he creates his clone, the world doesn't shift in an explosion of revelation. It begins softly, with a second breath, a second heartbeat, a face that mirrors his own. For a moment, there is wonder, the miracle of company, of shared awareness. Two beings where before there was one. Lemongrab has never known empathy, but now, standing before himself, he believes he might finally have found it. The air between them hums with potential. It is fragile, trembling, almost tender. But soon, that tenderness begins to collapse under the weight of identity. The second Lemongrab is not a puppet. He is equally alive, equally flawed. And in him the first Lemongrab sees everything he cannot stand about himself, the fear, the shrillness, the confusion. When his double speaks, the tone grates because it is too familiar. When he looks, the gaze feels invasive because it sees too much. The dream of being understood transforms into the horror of being exposed. Lemongrab wanted a mirror that would reflect perfection. What he got was a reflection that screamed back. Their relationship becomes a haunting study in self-recognition. Each one believes himself to be the original, the rightful ruler, the correct version. This conflict is not about power, not really. It's about authenticity, who deserves to exist. In the simplest sense, Lemongrab's encounter with his double is the show's most literal metaphor for internal division. It dramatizes what happens when someone confronts their own brokenness and cannot accept it. The two Lemongrabs are not enemies at first. They are halves of a single consciousness at war with itself. Still, even amidst this chaos, there are moments of fragile understanding, Sometimes they act in unison, finishing each other's phrases, laughing in eerie synchronization. These moments are unsettling but revealing, because they show that love, even self-love, is possible for him. It flickers like candlelight in a storm, unstable but undeniable. When Lemongrab touches his clone's shoulder, there is no irony, no manipulation, only the confused instinct to connect. His love is clumsy, but it is real, and that is the first step toward redemption, to want something beyond fear. Yet the tragedy of Lemongrab's self-encounter is that it cannot last. The more they live together, the more each one fears dissolution, the idea that if the other exists, the self becomes less real. This is the essence of narcissism, but also of loneliness. Lemongrab cannot love what mirrors him because he has not learned to love himself. Every kindness the clone offers feels like condescension. Every correction feels like betrayal. The two spiral into a cycle of competition, oscillating between affection and aggression, unity and rejection. It is the emotional pattern of trauma repeating itself, connection followed by collapse. Adventure Time often hides psychological truths in surreal images, and the Lemongrab story is no exception. Their life together in the Lemon Castle resembles an experiment in coexistence gone wrong, a study of how empathy can curdle when unhealed pain is involved. They attempt to build order, to rule together, but every decision becomes a referendum on identity. Each insists that the other is not right. The phrase, unacceptable, returns like a mantra, no longer aimed outward at the Candy citizens, but inward, echoing through the mind. Acceptance, after all, is what Lemongrab has always lacked, not from others, but from himself. It is telling that even as the two fight, they never truly separate. Their conflict is intimate, suffocating, and in its own twisted way, affectionate. They need each other to exist. The first Lemongrab finds in the second a companion for his despair, someone who understands the language of his panic. The second, meanwhile, experiences identity for the first time. To be a copy is still to be someone. In this paradox, both find a sense of self, even if it is painful. Their screams toward each other become the only dialogue they know, but it is still communication. In the world of ooh, even pain is a form of connection. There are glimpses, brief and haunting, of harmony. The two Lemongrabs share meals, patrol their lemon subjects, and occasionally laugh together, their voices shrill yet synchronized. In those moments, we see the outline of what could have been, two souls who understand each other because they share the same wound. But like most of Adventure Time's most tragic figures, they cannot sustain peace. The past is too loud, the inner noise too relentless. Eventually, fear wins. One Lemongrab devours the other, a literal act, yet more profoundly a symbol of what trauma does when left unresolved. It consumes itself. This act is not just violence, it is despair. When Lemongrab consumes his twin, he is not expressing dominance. He is trying to silence the part of himself that reminds him he is broken. It is the ultimate act of self-destruction disguised as control. But instead of peace, it brings only nausea, guilt, and deeper isolation. In that grotesque image, one Lemongrab swollen with the other, we see the cost of refusing to integrate one's pain. When we reject the parts of ourselves we find unbearable, they do not vanish. They live inside us, louder than ever. Yet, paradoxically, this moment marks the beginning of Lemongrab's slow redemption, because after that act of violence, he can no longer deny that something is wrong. His self-devouring forces awareness. For the first time, he feels remorse, not yet compassion, but the stirrings of it. The scream that follows is not merely rage, but grief. He has become what he feared, monstrous, alone, bloated with guilt. The tragedy has reached its deepest point, and from there, transformation begins. Adventure Time treats Lemongrab's duality not as a horror to be escaped, but as a mirror for everyone's internal division. Each person holds a twin within, the version of themselves they reject. Lemongrab's encounter with his clone is a dramatized version of self-reconciliation gone wrong. But in watching it fail, we understand what healing would require: acceptance, compassion, and the willingness to live with imperfection. Lemongrab's redemption, when it comes, will not be grand or heroic. It will come in small, trembling gestures, moments where he learns to coexist with the noise rather than erase it. His story reminds us that the self is not a stable object, but a conversation. To exist is to be plural, to hold contradictions. Lemongrab's inability to accept that plurality is what causes his suffering. He wants to be one thing, right, good, perfect, but life refuses to flatten itself into simplicity. The other Lemongrab, even devoured, remains within him as a presence, a whisper, and that whisper becomes conscience. It tells him, in its own distorted way, that he is not entirely beyond hope. In later moments, when Lemongrab acts with a trace of gentleness or remorse, it is that inner voice speaking, the memory of the one he consumed. His redemption is internal dialogue, not external forgiveness. He begins to govern differently, to listen more, to doubt his own declarations. It is uneven, fragile progress, but progress nonetheless. The mirror he once destroyed becomes invisible, yet constant, guiding him toward understanding. The lesson is simple yet profound. Even the parts of ourselves we destroy can still save us if we remember them. When we strip away the surreal imagery, the lemon skin, the screams, the castle, Lemongrab's tale becomes universal. It is about the battle between the need for control and the need for love. It is about what happens when a person believes they must be flawless to be accepted. The more they strive for perfection, the more they collapse under the weight of their own expectations. Lemongrab's tragedy is the human tragedy. To mistake order for peace, obedience for connection, silence for safety. And his slow awakening is the human hope that even the most rigid heart can learn to soften. As this chapter closes, imagine Lemongrab alone again in his vast echoing halls. But now the silence is different. It is heavier, more thoughtful. His shadow stretches long across the lemon floor, and within that shadow you can almost see another outline, faint, transparent, but still there. The other Lemongrab lives on, not as a ghost of torment, but as a quiet reminder. Lemongrab's face twitches, his hands shake. For the first time, he does not scream. He inhales, trembles, and whispers something only he can hear. It sounds almost like forgiveness. In the barren stillness of Castle Lemongrab, the world is ruled by sound. Every corridor hums with tension. Every corner echoes with the reverberation of command. Here, silence is not peace, it is danger, a prelude to eruption. The kingdom is built from the same material as its ruler's mind: rigid walls, symmetrical corridors, and 1,000 tiny rules meant to hold the chaos inside. The air smells of sugar and lemon rind, and beneath it all lingers the sour scent of fear. This is not a kingdom in any noble sense. It is a laboratory of loneliness. The lemon people do not live, they obey. Their movements are small, their voices faint, their eyes wide with the knowledge that even breathing too loudly could be unacceptable. Lemongrab has transformed his inner confusion into architecture. a citadel of anxiety projected outward. Every rule, every decree, every punishment he delivers is an attempt to make sense of the noise within him. But no matter how many laws he writes, the noise never stops. To understand Lemongrab's rule is to understand his pain. His kingdom is not an empire of ambition, but of desperation. It is the externalization of one thought. If I can control everything around me, maybe I will stop feeling afraid. But fear cannot be starved by control. It only grows hungrier. The lemon people's obedience feeds his paranoia. Their silence becomes proof of their rebellion. Their eyes, their trembling, he interprets it all as mockery. And so he tightens the rules again, believing that somewhere, buried under enough order, there will be peace. Yet, paradoxically, Lemongrab does care for his subjects in his own malformed way. He believes his surveillance, his constant scolding, are acts of protection. Like a parent terrified for a child's safety, he cannot stop hovering. He watches because he does not know how to trust. He disciplines because he cannot express affection. This is the twisted tenderness of trauma, to confuse control with love. The more he watches over them, the more isolated he becomes from them. They fear him, yes, but they also pity him in their quiet, unspoken way. His subjects mirror him like reflections of a fractured self. Each lemon person is a fragment of Lemongrab's psyche, obedient, nervous, desperate for approval. They echo his tone, mimic his gestures, even share his compulsions. He has unknowingly created a kingdom made in his image, a living metaphor for internal repetition. What he calls order is in truth a cycle of self-replication. Every rule he enforces against them is a rule he cannot follow himself. Every punishment he delivers is a punishment he feels twice over. His authority is a prison with transparent walls. Still, within that prison, small acts of rebellion flicker. A lemon person whispers a joke. Another hums a tune while cleaning. These gestures of individuality are microscopic, yet to Lemongrab they are seismic, each one a reminder that life cannot be completely contained. When he discovers such acts, he reacts not only with anger, but with betrayal. He cannot comprehend that disobedience might be a form of vitality. To him, it is proof that the world is unstable, that his efforts are futile. Each time he screams, "Unacceptable," he is really confronting the truth that life will never fit the mold he's built for it. There's something almost sacred in his failure. For all his tyranny, Lemongrab never entirely destroys the spark of life in his kingdom. The lemon people endure him with quiet grace, and their resilience is what keeps Oo's moral fabric intact. They are the embodiment of patience in the face of madness. Over time, their mere existence begins to soften him. Their fear becomes his loneliness, reflected back, and slowly, painfully, he begins to see it. The same way he once looked at his clone and saw his reflection, now he looks at his people and sees something even deeper. The consequence of his isolation, Adventure Time, has always blurred the line between metaphor and emotion, and Lemongrab's rule is one of its most precise metaphors for the inner tyrant. We all have one, the voice that says we must be better, neater, quieter, safer. For most of us, it whispers. For Lemongrab, it shouts. His castle is the mind under siege by its own need for order. The lemon people are his impulses, his joys, his fears, marching in circles under his scrutiny. His every decree is a plea to silence the unpredictable rhythm of being alive. But to be alive is to be unpredictable. And so, his kingdom can never know peace. There's a moment subtle, nearly invisible, when the first crack appears in his rule. He pauses before punishing a lemon person. His hand trembles. The subject looks up, eyes wide, expecting rage. But Lemongrab hesitates. Something like recognition flickers across his face. He sees not disobedience, but fear. The same fear that lives inside him. It passes quickly, drowned by old instincts. But it marks a shift. For the first time, the concept of empathy flickers in him, small as a candle in a storm. He begins to experience the weight of authority, not as power but as burden. The endless enforcement exhausts him. The noise in his mind becomes heavier, the castle quieter. Nights stretch long. He patrols empty halls, muttering rules to himself like prayers. But the rules no longer soothe him. He begins to sense that something in his kingdom is dying, not the lemon people, but the spirit of meaning. He built the world to protect himself from chaos, but now it feels like a tomb. The tragedy of Lemongrab's rule is that he truly believes he is protecting life. In his distorted reasoning, strictness equals safety. But his concept of safety is rooted in fear, not care. And so, every act meant to preserve ends up suffocating. This paradox drives him deeper into confusion. His face grows gaunter, his eyes wider, his gestures sharper. The kingdom reflects this deterioration. Walls crack, doors warp, yet still he insists everything is fine. Like a mind refusing to confront its pain, the structure decays under the pretense of perfection. And then, without warning, laughter returns. A lemon child giggles somewhere in the distance. The sound slices through the quiet like sunlight through curtains. It is innocent, unaware of its danger. Lemongrab freezes. For an instant, his entire world holds still. The sound is unbearable, and yet it's beautiful. It reminds him of something he never had, joy without control. The child's laughter is the antithesis of everything he's built, and it awakens something deep in him, something that has slept since his creation, curiosity. He follows the sound. He finds the child. The moment is simple but transformative. The child does not flee. They just stare, smiling awkwardly. Lemongrab doesn't know what to do. His instinct is to shout, to correct, but something stops him. The laughter has already done what words never could. It cracked the shell. In that fragile pause, he begins to sense the possibility of gentleness. He doesn't understand it, but he feels it. He leaves without a word, shaken by the encounter, his heart uncomfortably loud. This encounter lingers in him like a melody he cannot forget. Days later, he hears echoes of it in his mind, between screams and silences. It bothers him, confuses him, comforts him. It becomes the seed of something new, the faint realization that perhaps life's noise is not a flaw to be corrected, but the very sound of existence. The kingdom of noise, once his prison, begins to sound less like chaos and more like truth. The gradual softening of Lemongrab's rule reflects the slow evolution of self-awareness. His decrees grow less violent, his surveillance wanes. He still screams, he may always scream, but the meaning behind it shifts. Where once it was accusation, it becomes expression. The lemon people sense this change. They move a little freer. They speak a little louder. Their fear does not vanish, but it loosens its grip. Lemongrab, without realizing it, has begun to learn from them what Princess Bubblegum could never teach him: the art of coexistence. In the end, his kingdom is still imperfect, still strange, still tinged with melancholy, but the transformation lies not in its walls, but in its air. The noise remains, laughter, cries, murmurs, yet it no longer feels like rebellion. It feels like life. Lemongrab stands on a balcony, looking over his lemon subjects, eyes wide but softer. For once, he does not issue an order, he simply watches. The sound of their chatter rises like a distant song. He does not understand it, but he allows it. And in that allowing, for the briefest moment, peace breathes through him. The kingdom of noise has become something else. Not silence, not perfection, but harmony made from imperfection. For the first time, Lemongrab listens. Perfection was always the silent law of Lemongrab's existence. It governed every breath, every glance, every thought that flickered across his anxious mind. From the moment he was created, he knew somehow that he was meant to be right, precise, obedient, complete. But what Princess Bubblegum made in him was not completion. It was hunger. A hunger so deep it swallowed everything around it. He believed perfection would bring him peace. That if he could align every object, command every subject, control every sound, the ache in his chest would quiet. The need for order became his heartbeat. Every mistake he saw in the world felt like a personal attack, a confirmation that existence itself was wrong. And if the world was wrong, it was his duty to correct it. He patrolled his halls endlessly, searching for things to fix. A crooked candle, a footprint on the floor, a lemon person breathing too loudly, each one a reminder that the world refused to obey him. His days became a blur of cleaning, punishing, reorganizing. The castle gleamed, but the air was dead. Even the light seemed afraid to linger. He mistook that silence for success. It was not peace, it was absence. The lemon people obeyed, but they did not live. Their movements were mechanical, their faces blank. They had learned that in Lemongrab's kingdom, to exist quietly was safer than to exist fully. He mistook their stillness for perfection. He called it progress. But deep beneath the flawless surface, something was rotting, a hollowness spreading through the castle like mould behind polished walls. Lemongrab's perfectionism was not vanity, it was fear. Every imperfection around him reflected a flaw he could not bear to see within himself. He scrubbed the world clean because he could not cleanse his own confusion. Every sound, every difference, every act of spontaneity reminded him that he was not complete, that something essential in him had been left unfinished. The need to control was not pride, it was terror, sharpened into purpose. The tragedy of Lemongrab's hunger was that it disguised itself as care. He wanted the world to be perfect because he wanted it to be safe. He wanted it to stop hurting him. He thought if he could make the kingdom flawless, he might finally deserve to exist inside it. But perfection is not safety, it is distance. It is a wall built between the self and everything unpredictable, including love. As the days passed, his obsession began to eat itself. The more order he enforced, the more cracks appeared. The lemon people, unable to meet his impossible expectations, began to break down. Their silence deepened into despair. They stopped looking at him altogether. Lemongrab mistook this again for success, telling himself that perfection required discipline, that fear was necessary for harmony. But even as he repeated this, something small inside him began to rebel. Late at night, when the castle was still, he would pace the corridors alone. His reflection followed him in every window, tall, thin, shaking. The sight of his own face made him uneasy. He began to notice the unevenness in his skin, the tension in his posture, the twitch at the corner of his eye. He saw the flaw in himself, and for a moment his mind faltered. He was chasing something he could never become. His creation had been imperfect, and all his control was an attempt to correct that. But how does one perfect what was never complete? This realization did not come as wisdom, but as exhaustion. The hunger that had driven him for so long began to turn inward, consuming him. He shouted less, not from patience, but from fatigue. He grew thin, his voice hoarse. The silence of his kingdom pressed in on him, until even he could no longer bear it. He stood in his perfect halls, surrounded by perfect symmetry, and for the first time it all looked meaningless. The castle, once a monument to his order, began to feel like a tomb. The air was too clean, the walls too still. The absence of imperfection became unbearable. He began to crave something, he didn't know what, a sound, a movement, anything that would prove life still existed. But when he tried to summon his lemon people, their eyes were hollow. They responded, but there was no spark in them. His perfection had erased the very thing he claimed to protect. For the first time, he began to question his own rules. He stood in the center of his silent throne room and tried to recall what it was all for. Perfection had promised him peace, but it had given him emptiness. He had everything exactly as he wanted it, yet he felt more unstable than ever. He realized that perfection was not a goal, it was a trap, a machine that required constant feeding, devouring both master and subject alike. The first crack in his certainty came in the form of sound. One night, drifting through the corridors, he heard something faint, a small, wavering hum. It came from one of the lemon people, singing softly to themselves. It was imperfect, off-key, fragile. Lemongrab froze. His instinct was to stop it, to silence what was out of order. But the sound pierced him in a way he could not explain. It filled the air with something he had not felt in years. Life. He stood there in the dark, listening. The song wavered, broke, continued. It was nothing like the sterile quiet he had built, and yet it made the silence bearable. For the first time, Lemongrab did not interrupt. He let the imperfection live. Something in him, something long buried, stirred awake. That moment did not transform him all at once. Change in Lemongrab comes slowly, like a wall cracking one hairline at a time. But it planted a seed. From then on, he began to hear things differently. The footsteps of his citizens no longer sounded intrusive. The rustle of their movements no longer irritated him. He began to notice the difference between noise and sound, that one demanded to be stopped, while the other simply asked to be heard. He started allowing small flaws to remain. A crooked candle, a mismatched chair, a voice speaking too loudly. He told himself it was temporary, an experiment. But each act of tolerance loosened something in him. His mind, once rigid as stone, began to bend. The hunger for perfection had not been feeding him, it had been starving him of experience. Now, for the first time, he began to taste the world as it was, uneven, alive, unpredictable. What he did not yet know was that this acceptance would not only change his kingdom but save him. Perfection had kept him isolated. It had made him a ruler, but never a being among others. As he loosened his grip, he began to glimpse the thing he had always craved, but could never create by force, connection. The lemon people's movements became expressive again. Their faces softened. They looked at one another when they spoke. The castle, once a place of fear, began to sound like breathing. Lemongrab watched it all unfold, with confusion that bordered on wonder. The very imperfection he had spent his life erasing was what made everything feel real. The hum of disorder was not a flaw in the system. It was the heartbeat of life itself. The hunger for perfection had been his attempt to control that heartbeat, but the more he controlled it, the fainter it became. Now he understood that life could not be perfect because it was alive. By the time the castle settled into this new rhythm, Lemongrab was no longer chasing perfection. He was learning to exist inside imperfection without collapsing. The shift was not dramatic, but it was everything. The same man who once measured worth in silence now found peace in the noise of others. His hunger had not vanished, it had changed shape. It no longer drove him toward dominance, but toward understanding. Perfection had promised him an escape from chaos. What it gave him, instead, was emptiness. Only when he let chaos return, soft, human, imperfect, did he find meaning. The hunger that once devoured him became the very thing that taught him how to live. And from that quiet acceptance, something new began to grow inside him, the first trace of empathy. The realization that others felt as deeply as he did, that their imperfections were mirrors of his own. That connection, not order, was what made a kingdom whole. The perfection he sought was never something to achieve, it was something to let go of. And as he began to release it, piece by piece, he unknowingly stepped onto the path that would lead him toward the one thing he had always been missing, the ability to love and to be loved in return. Loneliness is Lemongrab's oldest companion. It was there before his first breath, woven into the act of his creation. When Princess Bubblegum brought him to life, she did not cradle him, she examined him. He opened his eyes not to love, but to expectation. And in that instant, something fundamental was missing. Every living thing in Oo has roots, emotional, historical, communal. But Lemongrab was born rootless, an idea sculpted into flesh. His loneliness was not a condition that came later. It was his origin. Over time, that loneliness hardened into habit. He learned to carry it the way others carry. A heartbeat, involuntary, constant, invisible until it aches. It colours everything he sees. The quiet of his castle is not peaceful. It is a mirror of his inner void. Even when surrounded by lemon people, he feels alone. They obey him, mimic him, and exist because of him, yet none of them truly see him. To them, he is both creator and captor, god and warden. Their fear erects a wall between them that not even his authority can breach. Lemongrab's loneliness is different from mere isolation. It is active, alive, gnawing at him. It whispers through the corridors like wind through cracks. It turns silence into pressure, sound into agitation. When he screams, it is not just frustration, it is an attempt to fill that void. The volume of his voice is proportional to the depth of his emptiness. His scream says, I exist, please someone, answer me. Adventure Time often depicts loneliness as a kind of gravity, an invisible force pulling characters toward or away from each other. For Lemongrab, it is both gravity and cage. It keeps him tethered to the world, but prevents him from reaching it. He craves connection, yet sabotages it the moment it nears. When someone shows him kindness, he mistrusts it. When someone challenges him, he feels betrayed. His loneliness is self-sustaining, a cycle of yearning and rejection, of fear and longing. To be alone feels safe, to connect feels fatal. And yet, buried deep beneath his hysteria, Lemongrab possesses a desperate innocence. He does not understand how to bridge the gap between himself and others, but he never stops trying in his own distorted way. He offers gifts no one wants, delivers speeches no one understands, and demands love in the only language he knows, control. Even his acts of cruelty contain a plea for intimacy. When he locks someone away, it is because he cannot bear their freedom. Their independence feels like abandonment. His tyranny is a clumsy way of saying, "Don't leave me." This paradox makes his loneliness so profoundly human. The more he fears rejection, the more he ensures it. His screams drive others away, which confirms his belief that he is unlovable, which fuels his next scream. The circle tightens until even kindness feels threatening. This is the architecture of despair, self-made, self-reinforcing. The tragedy is that Lemongrab is aware of it, dimly. Somewhere inside, he knows that he is the cause of his own suffering, but he cannot stop. Awareness without ability is its own form of torment. Over time, this awareness begins to crack his shell. The first signs appear not as words, but as gestures. His posture softens, his tone hesitates. The edges of his anger fray into confusion. He looks at the lemon people and sees something new: exhaustion. They are tired of fear. And in their tired eyes, he recognizes himself. That reflection cuts deep. For the first time, he feels not dominance, but responsibility. The weight of loneliness begins to shift, from something that defines him to something he must understand. The turning point comes quietly, as most of Lemongrab's shifts do. One day, he hears his subjects singing. The song is simple, off-key, childish. They sing it in secret, in a corner of the castle where they think he cannot hear. It is a lullaby, soft and trembling. Lemongrab freezes, his body rigid. His instinct is to punish them. Singing is noise is disorder, but something stops him. The melody stirs a memory that doesn't exist, the sensation of being soothed, of being held. His eyes widen, his mouth quivers, and for the first time in his life, he listens without interruption. He doesn't understand the words. He doesn't need to. The song carries a warmth that no rule can replicate. It fills the room with a gentleness he has never felt. When it ends, he does not speak. He simply stands there, trembling, the silence now too sacred to break. The lemon people, realizing he has heard, scatter in fear, but Lemongrab does not follow. He retreats instead, his chest aching with something he cannot name. It is not anger, it is not fear, it is longing, pure, unfiltered longing. In the days that follow, he finds himself humming the tune under his breath. Not perfectly, he misses notes, stumbles on rhythm, but the act itself is revolutionary. For a being who once tried to eliminate all noise, to create music, even unintentionally, is an act of surrender. It means he has allowed a fragment of chaos to live inside him without trying to destroy it. The melody becomes a secret companion, a quiet proof that he has felt something close to connection. That is the first time Lemongrab begins to understand that loneliness cannot be conquered by control. It cannot be shouted away or replicated in clones. It must be met, acknowledged, and shared. The song of his people becomes the first bridge between him and the world beyond himself. He doesn't cross it yet, he merely sees it. But even seeing it changes everything. Awareness is the seed of empathy. Still, loneliness doesn't leave him. It evolves. It becomes less of a wound and more of a presence, something he carries rather than something that carries him. He begins to recognize it not as punishment, but as a reminder of what he wants, connection. When he walks through his halls now, he notices details he never saw before. The soft chatter of lemon people, the flicker of candlelight on the walls, the faint creak of doors. The sounds no longer irritate him, they ground him. The world, once a threat, starts to sound like company. But redemption is never clean. Even as Lemongrab softens, he still slips. Fear still overtakes him. The hunger for perfection still bites. He still shouts, still overreacts, still tries to enforce silence when his mind feels loud. Yet afterward, he regrets it. He tries, haltingly, to make amends, small gestures, barely coherent apologies. The lemon people, confused but hopeful, begin to respond with cautious warmth. They still fear him, but now, mixed within that fear, is pity, the beginning of understanding. Adventure Time often portrays healing as cyclical rather than linear, and Lemongrab's loneliness follows that rhythm. It doesn't disappear, it transforms. His solitude becomes a landscape rather than a prison, vast, strange, and full of echoes that no longer hurt quite as much. The silence that once suffocated him now offers reflection. The noise that once enraged him now reminds him he's not alone. His loneliness becomes his teacher. By the time the castle's halls settle into their new rhythm, Lemongrab has changed in ways too subtle for anyone outside to notice. But within him, the transformation is monumental. He no longer mistakes obedience for love. He no longer sees noise as threat. And, most importantly, he begins to sense that perhaps his creation, his very existence, was not a mistake, but a question waiting to be answered. That answer is still forming, soft and uncertain, but it hums beneath his every breath. He stands once more on the same balcony where he used to scream. The lemon fields stretch endlessly before him. The wind is gentle, carrying faint voices of his people, working, laughing, existing. He listens. The sound no longer irritates him. It comforts him. For the first time, the kingdom feels alive, not obedient. Lemongrab's face relaxes, the tight corners of his mouth softening into something that almost resembles peace. The weight of loneliness does not vanish. It never does. But now it feels less like a burden and more like proof that he is capable of feeling deeply. And perhaps that is what redemption truly is, not erasing the pain, but learning to live with it. As the light fades and the castle quiets, Lemongrab closes his eyes. The song returns to his mind, distant and imperfect. He hums it softly, a single note held too long, too loud, but sincere. It fills the empty air, not to silence it, but to share it, and for once the echo that returns is gentle. For Lemongrab, Princess Bubblegum is not just a person, she is the horizon of his existence. Every thought he has ever had stretches toward her, even when he screams her name in fury. She is both mother and god, origin and tormentor. The shape of his soul was moulded by her hands, yet she never truly saw what she made. To her, Lemongrab is a miscalculation, a reminder that creation is never clean. To him, she is the unreachable promise of approval. Their connection is not a relationship, it is a haunting. He calls her mother because he must, but the word burns in his throat. It is not affection, it is yearning wrapped in resentment. Every visit she pays to Castle Lemongrab unravels him. He straightens his posture, tightens his rules, and forces his lemon people into stillness, desperate to prove he has become what she wanted, a functional ruler, a success. But she always looks at him with that same expression, part pity, part detachment, the gaze of a scientist examining a result. In her eyes, he is data. In his, she is divinity. When she leaves, the silence that follows is unbearable. Her absence feels like vacuum. The walls of the castle echo with the unspoken question, why wasn't I enough? Lemongrab's voice rises to fill the void, shouting orders, rewriting laws, punishing minor imperfections. His cruelty spikes after every visit, not because he hates her, but because he cannot bear how much he wants her approval. Each act of control is a plea disguised as rage. Look at me, see me, tell me I did well. Princess Bubblegum, for all her brilliance, does not realize what she created. Lemongrab is not simply a failed ruler, he is her mirror. Every flaw in him reflects a flaw in her. Her obsession with control, her fear of emotional vulnerability, her tendency to treat people as instruments of her will. When she looks at him, she sees everything she hides from herself. That is why she cannot love him. To do so would require admitting that he came from her truth, not her error. In a quiet, devastating way, Lemongrab knows this. He feels it even if he cannot articulate it. His mind, though chaotic, is perceptive. He understands that she looks at him with discomfort, not disgust, and that discomfort is worse. Disgust would at least acknowledge him. Discomfort turns him into something to be avoided. He becomes the ghost that follows her, the shadow of her perfection, the price of her precision. His existence exposes the cost of her godhood. The tension between them is not hatred, but grief. Every time she tries to fix him, he grows worse. Every time he tries to please her, she withdraws. Their attempts at reconciliation only deepen the wound. It is as if the universe itself refuses to let them coexist peacefully. The Creator bound to the consequences of creation. The creation bound to the indifference of its maker. Yet beneath their failures runs an unspoken connection, fragile and persistent. They understand each other's loneliness. Princess Bubblegum is, in her own way, as isolated as Lemongrab. Her intelligence isolates her, her control defines her. She cannot afford softness, cannot show weakness, because the survival of the Candy Kingdom depends on her composure. Lemongrab is the only one who sees through it, though he doesn't know why. His very existence is the piece of her she tried to exile, the voice that screams what she suppresses. When she looks at him, she sees the chaos that lives beneath her calm. When he looks at her, he sees the order he can never reach. They complete each other in the most painful way possible. Their meetings often end in frustration, but buried within those moments are gestures of something deeper, almost tenderness. Once, when Lemongrab collapses in exhaustion, Bubblegum steadies him. Her touch is brief, clinical, but it lingers. He trembles beneath it. That single act, a hand on his shoulder, burns brighter in his memory than all the orders she's ever given him. To her, it is a reflex. To him, it is revelation. For days after, he behaves differently, quieter, more deliberate, as if trying to preserve the feeling. It is a glimpse of what love might have been, but it doesn't last. The next time she visits, she finds his kingdom in chaos again. The lemon people are restless. He is frantic. He shouts at her, accusing her of abandonment, of cruelty. She argues back, not out of anger, but frustration, insisting that he must learn to govern himself. Their voices rise, overlap, and finally collapse into silence. They stand there, breathing heavily, unable to bridge the gap. It is the purest image of their relationship. Two beings, bound by creation, but divided by purpose. She made him to serve order. He exists to reveal disorder. Adventure Time never paints their bond as purely tragic. It is layered, ambiguous, and quietly redemptive. Over time, something subtle shifts in Bubblegum. She begins to see Lemongrab not as failure, but as being. She visits less frequently, but when she does, she speaks to him, not at him. Her tone softens. She starts to treat him not as a reflection of her error, but as someone capable of growth. She even trusts him with responsibilities again, small ones, but meaningful. This is not forgiveness, but it is faith, and it changes everything. For Lemongrab, these small gestures carry enormous weight. When she entrusts him with a task, he trembles with both pride and terror. He knows she is testing him, but he also senses that she believes he can succeed. And for the first time, he does not want to prove her wrong or right, he just wants to do well. That distinction marks the quiet beginning of his independence. He is no longer driven solely by her gaze. A new motive is forming within him, self-worth. Still, the ghost of his creation never leaves him. He feels her presence even when she is gone, as though her approval lives in the walls of his castle. Sometimes he walks through the halls, speaking to her as if she were there, rehearsing conversations that will never happen. He tells her of small victories, that the lemon people worked together, that the fields are thriving, that the noise feels lighter. He imagines her smiling. It is delusion, perhaps, but it gives him comfort. For a being built from rejection, even imagined love can heal. In the end, their bond evolves into something quietly profound, not reconciliation, but recognition. Princess Bubblegum comes to understand that Lemongrab is not her failure, but her lesson. Through him, she confronts the limits of her control, and through her, Lemongrab learns that creation is not the same as care, but that care can still follow creation. Their relationship becomes a strange kind of forgiveness, enacted across distance. She allows him to exist, and he allows her to let go. When they meet again after a long absence, the air between them feels changed. Lemongrab does not bow. Bubblegum does not command. They simply stand together, silent. The noise that once defined them is gone. She nods, a small gesture, but he receives it like light breaking through cloud. He nods back, unable to speak. It is the first time they share quiet without fear. Later that night, back in his castle, Lemongrab feels something shift. The halls are still empty, but the emptiness feels softer. The echo of her nod follows him as he walks. For once, he does not need to scream to feel real. He stands by a window, looking out over the lemon fields, and feels the faint warmth of something new. Not perfection, not approval, but acceptance. The ghost of the Creator will always remain, but now it no longer haunts him. It walks beside him, quietly, like memory. And in that companionship, Lemongrab finally begins to understand what it means to live, not as someone's mistake, but as his own being. The castle begins to break long before Lemongrab realizes it. At first, it is subtle, a faint creak in the walls, a fracture too thin to notice. But with time, the signs multiply. The floors lose their shine. The symmetry of the corridors begins to warp. The lemon scent grows sharp and sour, clinging to the air like a warning. The castle Lemongrab, once his fortress of control, starts to crumble from the inside. For most of his life, Lemongrab believed the castle was him, that its structure reflected his worth, that its order meant safety. Every crack feels like a personal failure, a betrayal of the perfection he worked so hard to maintain. He scrambles to fix it, patching walls, polishing floors, shouting commands at his lemon people to clean faster, repair more, be better. But no matter how much he tries, the decay continues. Something invisible has shifted. The castle is no longer listening to him. In truth, the castle is not dying. It is changing. It is outgrowing its function as a prison of silence. The lemon people have begun to move differently, slower, freer. Their work is less precise, but more alive. They speak softly to one another when they think Lemongrab isn't listening. They laugh again, not in defiance, but in release. And every act of spontaneous life leaves a mark. The floors scuff, the walls crack, the air fills with the warmth of imperfection. The castle's deterioration is not decay, it is renewal. Lemongrab cannot see it that way yet. To him, the cracks are a reminder that control is slipping through his fingers. He feels the panic rise in him again, that old, familiar tightening in his chest, the urge to scream until everything obeys. For days he storms through the halls, shouting at the lemon people, demanding order. His voice echoes, louder than ever, but something strange happens. The echoes don't come back. His words vanish into the air like smoke. For the first time, the castle does not answer. He stops in the middle of a corridor, panting, his voice raw. The silence around him feels immense, not empty, but indifferent. The walls that once mirrored his rage now absorb it. The kingdom has grown past its need to respond to him. Lemongrab stares at the cracks, and for the first time, instead of fixing them, he listens to them. They make faint sounds, soft, shifting pops as the structure breathes. It sounds almost alive. That realization frightens him. If the castle can live, then it can die. And if it can die, then it is not perfect, which means that maybe nothing ever was. That thought tears through him like lightning, yet beneath the terror there is wonder. For the first time, Lemongrab begins to grasp that impermanence might not be failure. The cracks are not signs of death, but of movement. The world is no longer holding still for him, and maybe it never should have. He walks through his halls differently now. His hands no longer tremble with anger, but with hesitation. When he sees a broken window, he does not immediately fix it. He watches the wind move through it, carrying the scent of the fields inside. The breeze touches his skin, and he feels something he hasn't in a long time, air that isn't his. The outside world enters his perfect system, and instead of collapsing, it breathes. The lemon people notice the change before he does. He still shouts sometimes, but the fury has softened into noise, almost ritualistic, as though he's performing an old habit rather than feeling it. He eats with them now, awkwardly, sitting at long tables he once inspected for cleanliness. He doesn't know how to converse, so he mimics them, nodding when they nod, laughing half a second too late. It's imperfect, but it's effort. And that effort is what begins to rebuild the kingdom, not through repair, but through relationship. One day, a lemon person brings him a piece of broken glass, part of a shattered window. They hold it up as if to apologize. Lemongrab takes it, staring at his distorted reflection in the sharp edges. His face wobbles, refracted. For a moment, he sees multiple versions of himself, each one slightly different, each one imperfect. He doesn't scream. He doesn't correct. He just looks. The lemon person waits, nervous. Then, to everyone's surprise, he says softly, "It is fine." The words hang in the air like a miracle. They don't mean much on their own, but coming from him, they mean everything. For the first time, Lemongrab has accepted something broken without trying to fix it. The castle exhales, almost audibly. The lemon people smile. It is not triumph, not redemption, but it is peace, brief and fragile. Over the weeks that follow, the castle's decay becomes transformation. Moss creeps through the cracks. Light filters in through gaps once sealed. The air smells of earth and sugar. The sterile perfection that once defined the kingdom fades into something softer, more natural. Lemongrab doesn't fully understand it, but he feels it, the slow heartbeat of life returning to the structure he thought he controlled. The noise is different now, gentle, constant, alive. He begins to wander the castle at night, not to inspect, but to listen. The creaks of the wood, the distant murmurs of his subjects, the faint hum of wind, all of it forms a new kind of symphony. It is imperfect, unbalanced, ever-changing, but it is beautiful in ways he never allowed himself to notice before. He realizes that maybe perfection was never meant to be achieved. Maybe it was only meant to be sought, to push him far enough to discover something truer, harmony. The cracks in the castle mirror the cracks inside him. Where he once tried to seal them, he now lets them breathe. The grief, the anger, the confusion, they remain, but they move differently. They no longer scream, they murmur, they no longer command, they converse. The castle becomes a reflection of this new self, flawed, uneven, yet filled with life. And so, what was once a fortress becomes a home. The lemon people move freely through the halls, unafraid to sing. Lemongrab still walks among them with his stiff gait, still awkward, still uncertain. But now his presence doesn't silence the room. Sometimes he even smiles, not broadly, not often, but enough for others to notice. The cracks in the walls let sunlight in, and the light touches his face, softening its sharpness. It is not redemption yet. It is not forgiveness. But it is something gentler, acceptance. The castle, once his prison, is now his teacher. Through its breaking, it shows him that control was never safety, that silence was never peace. And Lemongrab, standing among the ruins of his own perfection, finally learns to live with the sound of the world breaking open. Empathy arrives for Lemongrab, not as revelation, but as discomfort. It begins with a feeling he cannot name, a small, twitching ache behind his ribs whenever he sees one of his lemon people flinch at his voice. It is not guilt exactly. Guilt implies awareness of harm. This is more primitive, closer to recognition. Something inside him begins to understand that others feel. Not just react, not just obey, but feel. For most of his existence, Lemongrab believed that only he could feel. His emotions filled every room, leaving no space for anyone else's. His anger, his fear, his loneliness, they were all consuming. He mistook volume for significance. If he was loudest, he must be right. But as his castle softened, as his walls cracked and the air of life seeped in, he began to notice other sounds, quieter, subtler, yet persistent. The whispers of his subjects, their laughter, their cries. For the first time, he realized that the noise of others was not competition, it was coexistence. It starts with a single lemon person, small, timid, constantly anxious. One day, while cleaning, they trip and break a jar of candy essence. The scent fills the room, sweet and sharp. Lemongrab turns towards the noise, his instincts firing. The lemon person freezes, waiting for punishment. In the old days, there would have been shouting, declarations of "unacceptable" and threats of confinement. But this time, Lemongrab does something strange. He stops. The moment stretches, the air hums with tension. The lemon person shakes. Lemongrab watches them, his eyes twitching, his mouth quivering between outrage and something else. The scent of the spilled candy stirs a memory, faint, buried, of sweetness, of safety, of a world where not everything is control. He realizes the lemon person's fear looks exactly like his own. The same trembling, the same wide eyes, the same need to be spared. Something shifts. For the first time, he doesn't see disobedience. He sees himself. He kneels, awkwardly, stiffly, and begins to pick up the glass shards. The lemon person watches in disbelief. Lemongrab says nothing. His movements are mechanical, but his silence is more powerful than any order. When he finishes, he mutters only, "Be careful," then leaves. The lemon person remains frozen long after, unsure whether this was mercy or madness. But the truth is simpler. It was empathy's first breath. From that moment, the castle's energy changes. Lemongrab begins to notice things he once considered beneath his attention. The way the lemon people lean on one another when they're tired. The way they share food or whisper stories when the lights dim. Their lives are small, repetitive, but real. And, for the first time, he doesn't want to erase them. He wants to understand them. The desire is clumsy, uncomfortable, almost painful, but it is there. Empathy, for Lemongrab, is not an emotional flood. It's a slow thaw. His heart doesn't burst open. It cracks. It creaks like the castle's old walls. He begins to remember moments that used to make no sense to him, when someone smiled at him without reason, when someone offered help he didn't ask for. He replays those moments like strange puzzles, and gradually he begins to understand. They were kindness. Not mockery, not manipulation, kindness. Adventure Time often portrays kindness as a small rebellion against despair. And in Lemongrab's world, it is exactly that. His entire kingdom was built on fear, the fear of error, the fear of disobedience, the fear of difference. Empathy is the antidote to that fear, and it grows in him like a stubborn plant breaking through concrete. He doesn't know how to nurture it, but he also can't kill it. The lemon people begin to test the boundaries of this change. One day, two of them argue loudly over a piece of fruit, an unthinkable act in the old days. Lemongrab storms toward them, his instincts flaring. But as he approaches, he hears their voices, not disrespectful, not rebellious, just human or lemon, perhaps. They are expressing frustration, asserting needs. The noise, once intolerable, now sounds alive. He stands there, listening, confused by the warmth that stirs inside him. He doesn't interrupt. He lets them finish. When they finally notice him, they freeze, waiting for wrath. But he simply says, "Resolved?" They nod. He nods back. It's not eloquent, it's not profound, but it's the first time he has allowed others to exist in their own right, to have emotions independent of his own. In that small exchange, Lemongrab becomes less of a ruler and more of a participant in the world he created. Empathy does not come without pain. As he begins to feel for others, he also begins to feel the weight of his past cruelty. The memories return, the punishments, the screaming, the fear he planted in every heart around him. At first, he tries to deny it. He tells himself it was necessary, that they needed guidance. But late at night, when the castle is quiet, he hears their old cries echo in his mind. They sound like his own. The realization pierces him. He did not teach them order, he taught them fear. And now he must unteach it. He starts small. He visits the lemon people not to command but to observe. He helps with tasks, offers awkward words of praise. His compliments are stilted and often confusing. You performed within acceptable ranges of acceptability, but the intent shines through. The lemon people begin to smile around him. The laughter that once haunted him now draws him in. The sound is strange, high-pitched, uncoordinated, but it warms the halls more effectively than any rule ever did. Still, empathy is not easy for him. It destabilizes everything he knows. For so long, authority was his armor. To feel is to be vulnerable, and vulnerability terrifies him. Some nights, he backslides, shouting at minor errors, reverting to old habits. But afterward, remorse hits him harder than any scream. He apologizes in ways only he can, by fixing what he broke, by standing guard silently while his subjects sleep, by speaking softly into the empty halls, as if asking the air itself for forgiveness. The castle, as always, mirrors him. The cracks widen, but flowers bloom from them now, wild, lemon-coloured blossoms that fill the air with sweetness. The lemon people start planting them intentionally, decorating the corridors. Lemongrab allows it. He even helps once, though his trembling hands crush more petals than he plants. Still, The gesture matters. The flowers grow, imperfect and uneven, just like him. Adventure Time's world has always blurred the line between the literal and the emotional, and here that truth is clearest. The rebirth of Lemongrab's empathy is not about redemption in the grand, heroic sense. It's about learning that existence is shared, that to live is to feel with, not just within. One evening, as the sun bleeds orange over the horizon, Lemongrab stands outside with his lemon people. They are laughing at something he doesn't understand, a joke too simple, too strange, but he finds himself smiling anyway. The sound of their laughter no longer pierces him. It vibrates gently through him, like music he doesn't need to comprehend to appreciate. He doesn't join in, but he doesn't retreat either. He just stands there, present. For the first time in his life, Lemongrab feels what silence was always meant to be, not absence, but peace. The space between the laughter and his breath feels full, not empty. This is how empathy begins for him, not with words, not with revelation, but with presence, with staying. Lemongrab, the loudest creature in Oo, finally learns to listen. For a long time, Lemongrab pretended the second him never existed. The memory sat buried under layers of noise and routine, like a wound sealed but not healed. But as empathy begins to take root, the silence grows deeper, and within that silence, ghosts begin to speak. He starts to remember. It happens one night in the half-light of the castle's corridor. A candle flickers, and the shadow on the wall splits in two. For an instant, it looks like another Lemongrab walking beside him. He freezes, his breath catches. The memory of the other him, the one he consumed, surges back like a suppressed scream. His twin's voice, his face, his eyes filled with confusion and fear. The echo of that final moment returns with painful clarity. The hunger, the merging, the silence after. For the first time, Lemongrab feels not justification but grief. The grief of killing something he loved without knowing he loved it. He sits down against the wall, shaking, his mind spinning between guilt and disbelief. The axe that once defined his madness now defines his awakening. He whispers into the dark, as if the other might still hear. I did not know what I was. His voice is softer than it has ever been, not the sharp, cutting sound that once ruled his world, but a trembling confession. The air doesn't answer, but something inside him does. A warmth spreads through his chest, heavy and bittersweet. It is recognition, the realization that he was never truly alone, even in his worst moments. The other Lemongrab was not a stranger, not a rival, but a mirror of the self he has spent years trying to escape. He consumed his twin because he could not bear to live beside himself. But now, in his newfound empathy, he begins to see that the twin never left. He lives inside him, the quiet, frightened part that wanted love, not control. The memory becomes constant, not as a haunting, but as a companion. When Lemongrab hesitates before shouting, he feels the other's hand on his shoulder. When he softens toward his people, he hears the other's voice, not words, but feeling. The part of him that was devoured has become conscience. His redemption is no longer about proving his goodness. It is about integrating the self he once destroyed. Adventure Time often shows healing as a dialogue between fragments, parts of oneself learning to coexist rather than conquer. Lemongrab's twin was his shadow, the emotional half he could not accept. Their fusion, grotesque as it seemed, was inevitable. Only now, with empathy blooming, does he begin to understand that the act was not the end, but the beginning of wholeness. The twin's silence within him is not punishment, it is patience. Still, facing this truth hurts. Some nights He dreams of the other's face, calm and kind, staring at him with quiet reproach. In the dreams, they don't argue. They simply exist in the same room, breathing the same air, as if time itself is trying to give them another chance. When Lemongrab wakes, his pillow is damp, his chest heavy, but his mind is clearer. He no longer runs from the memory. He tends to it like a wound that must stay open to heal. The lemon people notice the change. He speaks slower, moves gentler, and sometimes pauses mid-command, lost in thought. They do not know what he is remembering, but they sense reverence in his stillness. Once, when a lemon child asks him about the broken statue that once stood in the castle, a statue that used to depict both Lemongrabs together, he does not shout. He walks to it, brushes off the dust, and says, "He was me, but better." The child tilts their head, confused. Lemongrab sighs, the sound catching in his throat like a sob. "I made him go away. I did not know what it meant." The child, uncertain, touches his arm. It is a small gesture, but it undoes him. He stumbles away, tears stinging his eyes, ashamed and relieved at once. For the first time, his subjects see their ruler cry, and instead of fear, they feel compassion. In that moment, the castle becomes more human than it has ever been. The grief doesn't leave him, but it transforms into guidance. The voice of the clone, imagined, remembered, or spiritual, begins to accompany his thoughts. When he loses patience, it whispers, "Wait." When he judges too quickly, it murmurs, "Listen." When he despairs, it says, "You are not alone." The same voice that once mirrored his madness now steadies him. The split self becomes integration. In one of the show's quietest metaphors, Lemongrab's redemption lies not in erasing the monster, but in recognizing it as part of himself. The clone was never meant to be defeated. He was meant to be understood. Every human being carries that same duality, the voice of control and the voice of vulnerability. When we silence one, the other distorts. Lemongrab's story is the long, painful act of teaching those voices to speak together. He starts to build a small garden outside the castle, a strange, uneven plot where lemon seeds and candy soil mingle. It is not orderly. The rows are crooked, the colours clash, the air smells sweet and sour at once. The lemon people laugh at its oddness, but Lemongrab insists on tending it himself. Sometimes, when he works there alone, he speaks aloud, to the clone, to himself, to no one. "Look," he says softly, gesturing to a sprouting vine. "We grow." The garden becomes a living memorial, not of loss, but of reconciliation. Flowers bloom unevenly, some wither quickly, others flourish wildly. It is a perfect metaphor for him, inconsistent, awkward, alive. Each plant is a promise that imperfection can create beauty, that even ruin can bear fruit. He no longer needs to hide his flaws. He waters them. As the seasons shift, the garden grows unruly, and Lemongrab lets it. The lemon people begin to gather there after work, sitting in silence or humming songs. Lemongrab joins them sometimes, his presence awkward but welcome. They talk quietly, and though he doesn't always understand their jokes or small talk, he feels their warmth. The ghost inside him, the twin's voice, feels it too. Together they listen. Together they exist. The memory of the clone becomes less of a weight and more of a rhythm, pulsing quietly beneath everything he does. It is no longer pain, it is music. It is the hum of understanding that lives between forgiveness and guilt. Lemongrab doesn't speak of redemption. He lives it in the way he treats his people, in the care he gives his fragile garden, in the quiet dignity of a creature learning how to be whole. On nights when the moon hangs low over the lemon fields, he sometimes hears that second voice whisper through the leaves, a sound like wind, but softer, familiar. He closes his eyes, smiles faintly, and answers without words. The conversation never ends. It doesn't need to. The two lemongrabs are finally one, not perfectly, not completely, but truthfully. And so, from the memory of destruction, empathy flowers. From the act of self-devouring, self-understanding is born. What was once horror becomes grace. Lemongrab, who once screamed to silence the world, now whispers to keep it alive. Forgiveness, for Lemongrab, is not a word he ever expected to understand. It belongs to a language he was not made to speak, soft, uncertain, human. In his world, there were only rules and their violations, order and chaos, acceptance and rejection. Forgiveness has no place in such binaries. It requires a bridge between them, a willingness to hold contradiction without control. It asks the impossible of him, to release himself from the very system that gave him meaning. And yet, by the time empathy begins to breathe through him, forgiveness is already approaching, slow, patient, inevitable. Not as a light from above, but as something that grows from below, through the cracks in the ground he once polished smooth. It begins with an accident. A lemon person drops a bowl of food in the hall, spilling syrup across the floor. Lemongrab's old instincts flare, the command, the outrage, the scream rising like muscle memory. But before it reaches his mouth, something halts it. The image of the frightened worker, the scent of sweetness, the echo of his own trembling. He stands still. The syrup glistens. The lemon person waits for punishment. And then, in a voice quiet enough to frighten even himself, Lemongrab says, "It is fine." The words surprise him as much as anyone else. They hang there, uncertain, but real. The lemon person stammers, offers to clean it, but Lemongrab only nods. "We will clean, together." That small act, trivial by any other measure, shakes the entire kingdom. The lemon people whisper of it for days. They cannot believe what they saw, the ruler who once screamed at shadows now helping to scrub syrup from the floor. For Lemongrab, it feels like shedding a skin he didn't know he was still wearing. The act itself is not grand. The transformation lies in what it represents. He has broken his own law, not out of rebellion, but out of care. Forgiveness, he begins to see, is not about erasing wrongs. It is about changing the way we remember them. The syrup on the floor dries, but the mark it leaves becomes sacred. He does not order it polished away. He lets it stay, a stain, imperfect, honest. The sight of it steadies him. For once, imperfection does not demand correction. It demands compassion. From that moment, forgiveness takes shape inside him, not as an idea, but as an instinct. When he sees fear, he feels sorrow instead of power. When he remembers his past cruelty, the shame no longer freezes him, it softens him. He begins to understand that guilt can be fertile, that even regret can feed growth if allowed to breathe. He tends to it, like he tends to his garden, not pruning it but letting it evolve. Yet forgiveness, in as in life, is never one-directional. Lemongrab can forgive himself only insofar as his people learn to forgive him. And they too carry memories that sting. They remember the screams, the punishments, the constant fear. For them, trust is not a decision, but a process. They test him carefully, like touching a flame that once burned. A few speak freely to him now. Some still avoid his gaze. Others, particularly the younger ones, treat him with cautious affection. Lemongrab does not force their acceptance. He lets it unfold, understanding now that trust cannot be demanded, it must be earned and then honoured. His greatest test comes when one of his citizens rebels, not in malice, but in exhaustion. A lemon person breaks a tool and, overwhelmed, shouts back at him, telling him he has no right to lead. The words echo through the hall. The room freezes. Every eye turns to Lemongrab, expecting the return of the tyrant. The old him would have exploded, banished the dissenter, screamed until obedience returned, but the new Lemongrab stands still. He feels the rage surge, the instinct to control, the old circuitry lighting up. And then he remembers his twin, the face, the voice, the silence after. He breathes. Slowly, painfully, deliberately, he speaks. You are correct. I have no right. Only a chance. The hall goes silent. No one understands at first, but Lemongrab's trembling hands, his downcast eyes, make the meaning clear. The lemon person who shouted at him drops to their knees, overwhelmed by confusion, perhaps even guilt. Lemongrab does not punish them. He raises a hand, not in threat, but in benediction, and says, "Stand, it is fine." The phrase has become his new law, his strange gospel. It is fine, not because everything is, but because acceptance is the beginning of repair. The words echo through the castle in whispers, then in songs. The lemon people begin to use it themselves when something breaks, when someone fails. What began as a ruler's outburst of restraint becomes a communal prayer. Forgiveness spreads like light through cracked glass, refracted, uneven, but illuminating. It transforms the air of the castle, making it lighter, gentler. The walls no longer seem to listen for commands. They echo laughter now, uneven but sincere. The lemon people stop tiptoeing. They walk freely. Some even paint the cracks on the walls in bright colours, turning decay into design. Lemongrab allows it. He even helps once, though his brushstrokes are clumsy and too thick. The mess they leave behind is beautiful. Forgiveness is not peace, it is work. It requires Lemongrab to face the echoes of his own cruelty every day and choose not to repeat them. There are moments when he fails, when fear or fatigue makes him shout, when old instincts reclaim his tongue, but now, after the outburst, he apologizes. The first time he does it, his subjects are stunned. "I regret," he says haltingly, the words foreign and heavy. "I am learning." The room softens. A lemon person reaches up and squeezes his arm. "It's fine," they say, mimicking his own phrase back to him. He almost cries. Adventure Time's moral landscape has always blurred the heroic and the mundane, and Lemongrab's forgiveness follows that pattern. It is not about redemption through grand gesture, but through quiet repetition, the decision, again and again, to meet imperfection with gentleness. Each day he chooses patience. He rebuilds a world that once ran on fear. Eventually, Princess Bubblegum visits again. The castle is unrecognizable. The air smells of lemon and earth, not cold sugar. The walls are painted in uneven hues. Vines crawl through the cracks. The lemon people are smiling. She stands in silent awe. Lemongrab walks beside her, nervous, proud, uncertain. She looks at him, really looks at him, and for the first time there is no pity in her eyes, only respect. "You've changed," she says softly. "I am changing," he replies. The distinction matters to him. Change is not something finished. It is a verb, continuous. She nods. For the first time she calls him not a mistake, but her creation. It is the smallest sentence, yet it fills the room like sunlight. When she leaves, Lemongrab returns to his garden. He kneels beside the vines, tracing their crooked paths with his hands. The lemon people gather around. humming one of their quiet, off-key songs. He closes his eyes and listens. The sound is imperfect, a mix of laughter, sighs, rustling leaves, but he feels no need to correct it. Forgiveness, he realizes, is not something given or received. It is something lived. It is the act of staying gentle when the world could justify rage. It is letting others change you without shame. It is allowing the wound to stay open long enough for light to enter. He looks up at the cracked towers of his once sterile castle, now blooming with vines, and understands at last. Perfection was never the goal. The goal was to feel, to care, to endure the sound of others and still stay. Lemongrab exhales, slow and deep. The air tastes sweet and sour exactly as it should. He turns to his people, his voice steady, and says, "It is fine." And for once, everyone believes him. Peace does not arrive in Lemongrab's world as a sudden revelation. It creeps in slowly, like sunlight seeping through broken shutters, filling the space he once guarded so tightly. There are no grand declarations, no moment where the world transforms all at once. Instead, peace grows from the ordinary, from repetition, from the daily practice of gentleness. It is found in the soft rhythm of his breathing as he wakes, in the quiet conversations of his lemon people, in the way the castle hums now instead of echoing. He has stopped measuring silence as a form of control. Silence used to mean victory, the proof that his world was obeying him. Now, silence feels alive, a resting space between sounds. He hears it in the pauses between laughter, in the breath before someone speaks, in the gentle wind moving through the cracks of his walls. The same cracks that once symbolized failure have become the lungs of his kingdom. They let the world breathe. Every morning, Lemongrab walks through the halls without purpose. He used to patrol, searching for imperfection, scanning for disobedience. Now, he simply walks to feel the air. The lemon people greet him with cautious joy. Some still avert their eyes, but most smile. They bring him small gifts, flowers, a bowl of syrup, a clumsily painted pebble. He accepts them all with solemn nods, unsure how to express gratitude, but feeling it deeply. The kingdom no longer moves out of fear, it moves out of rhythm. Peace, he realizes, is not the absence of noise, it is the presence of understanding. The laughter of his people no longer feels invasive, it feels like a continuation of his own breath. Sometimes their songs drift through the corridors at dusk, uneven and strange, and he finds himself humming along, always slightly off-key. The melody does not need perfection to feel right. It only needs honesty. The castle, too, has changed. Where once its walls gleamed sterile and uniform, they now bear the fingerprints of countless hands. The lemon people have turned the corridors into murals, bright swirls of yellow, green, and pink. No pattern, no plan. Lemongrab sometimes traces those painted shapes with his fingers, not to inspect them, but to remember who made them. He no longer sees himself as the center of this world. He is part of it, one color among many. There are still moments of struggle. Old instincts do not vanish. They wait. A dropped tool, a crooked row of plants, a burst of loud laughter can still tighten his chest, make his voice rise. But the difference is that now he recognizes it. He can feel the storm forming and choose not to unleash it. When he does fail, when the scream escapes, he no longer hides from the aftermath. He apologizes, awkward and halting, and his people accept it. Forgiveness has become a cycle, not an event. Sometimes, when the nights are quiet, Lemongrab sits on the balcony where he once shouted at the stars. The fields stretch before him, silver under moonlight, dotted with small lights from the lemon people's cottages. The world feels larger now, not because it has grown, but because he has stopped trying to contain it. He watches the flickering lights and imagines each one as a thought, a dream, a heartbeat. The kingdom is alive, and for the first time he feels part of that life instead of apart from it. Peace, he learns, is not without pain. It is full of it, but the pain no longer feels like punishment. It feels like proof of being alive. The ache of memory, the small stings of regret, the awareness of impermanence, all of it weaves into a quiet kind of harmony. The same emotions that once consumed him now sustain him. Where once he screamed to be heard, he now listens to feel connected. There is a moment, small, private, and complete, when he truly understands this. He stands in his garden, the air thick with the smell of lemon blossoms and sugar soil. Around him, the lemon people tend to the plants, humming softly. The vines are tangled, imperfect, and beautiful. He feels the breeze move through them, and in it, he hears the faint echo of his clone's voice, not haunting him anymore, but accompanying him. The two of them, past and present, broken and whole, breathe together. He closes his eyes. The wind brushes against his face, warm and kind. The sounds of life surround him. Footsteps, laughter, the buzzing of insects, the distant song of something wild beyond the fields. It is noise, and it is perfect. For a moment, Lemongrab feels utterly at peace, not because the world has obeyed him, but because it has stopped needing to. He opens his eyes again and looks at the horizon. The sun is rising, soft and pale. Its light catches on the cracks of the castle walls, turning each fracture into a line of gold. He does not think to repair them. They are beautiful as they are, the map of everything he has survived. Peace, he thinks, is not about silence. It is about knowing that the noise belongs. It is the balance between sound and stillness, between control and surrender. It is the shape the world takes when you finally stop forcing it to be something else. Lemongrab smiles, a small, uncertain curve of his mouth, and whispers to no one in particular. It is fine. The words drift into the air and dissolve into the hum of life around him. The wind carries them through the cracks, into the castle, through the halls, and out across the lemon fields. The world answers back, not in words, but in presence. And, in that presence, Lemongrab finally understands what peace sounds like. It sounds like everything. Peace, when it finally settles into Lemongrab's life, does not stay still for long. It never does. The world, like breath, must move to remain alive. What he built, the soft rhythms, the quiet laughter, the balance of sound and silence, begins to shift again, not from malice, but from the simple nature of existence. Change arrives the way it always does in Oo, quietly, then all at once. The first signs are small. The lemon people start experimenting. New games, new songs, new inventions. They stop asking his permission. It is not rebellion, it is growth. But to Lemongrab, who has only just learned to live without control, it feels like standing at the edge of an earthquake. The air grows busier. The noise thickens. The predictability of his days dissolves. For a while, he endures it. He tells himself that life is meant to move, that order is not the same as peace. But old reflexes are patient. They wait for cracks to widen. One morning, he finds two lemon people arguing in his garden. The vines have been rearranged into strange shapes, spirals, faces, even a rough statue of him made from flowers. It is absurd, a little ugly, and completely free. He stares at it for a long time, not angry but overwhelmed. The image of himself, smiling in crude colour, feels like both mockery and miracle. The old Lemongrab stirs inside him, whispering that chaos is returning, that everything he built will collapse. His breath quickens. For a moment, he nearly screams. Then he stops. He feels the wind move through the flowers. He watches the lemon people laughing nervously, waiting for his judgment. And he understands, this chaos is not the kind that destroyed him. It is the kind that keeps life alive. It is the same chaos that once made him, the unpredictable spark of creation that even his creator could not contain. He remembers Princess Bubblegum's hands, the way she shaped him from sugar and will, and realizes that maybe this disorder is her truest gift, the proof that creation cannot be controlled forever. Still, peace wavers. There are nights when he cannot sleep, when the laughter outside his window feels too loud, too alive. The noise that once comforted him starts to sound like loss again, the loss of quiet, of certainty, of stillness. He walks the halls, searching for structure in the shifting rhythm of his kingdom. He begins to wonder whether peace ever truly existed, or whether it was just a pause between storms. But then, one night, he steps into the courtyard and finds the lemon people gathered around a fire. They are telling stories, wild, impossible tales of old adventures, of monsters and heroes, of him. In their versions, he is strange, brave, sometimes foolish, but always trying. They laugh at him, yes, but with affection. He listens from the shadows, stunned. His life, once defined by screams and solitude, has become legend. The chaos he feared has turned into storytelling, memory, culture. The noise he tried to silence has become meaning. He steps into the firelight. The lemon people fall silent for a moment, unsure of his reaction. Then, softly, he says, "Continue." And they do. The stories resume, louder, brighter. Lemongrab sits among them, his face flickering in the glow. Every exaggeration, every laughter-filled retelling of his past feels like a strange absolution. They are no longer afraid to remember him as he was, and in that fearless remembering, something in him heals. The return of chaos, he realizes, is not a curse, but a cycle. Order creates safety. Safety allows joy, and joy invites change. The moment he tries to freeze it, it dies. Peace was never meant to be permanent. It was meant to prepare him for this, for the ability to live within the storm. The laughter, the unpredictability, the small disobediences are not threats. They are proof that the kingdom is finally alive enough to move without his control. He spends the following days walking among his people, observing the new life blossoming around him. They build strange devices, paint new murals, even create music he doesn't understand. The sounds clash and overlap, chaotic and wild. But when he listens closely, he can hear rhythm in it, a pulse. It is the same pulse that once terrified him, the same one that echoed through him when he first opened his eyes, the sound of life itself. One afternoon, a young lemon person approaches him with a question. "Why do you not shout anymore?" Lemongrab thinks for a long moment before answering. "Because I do not need to be louder than the world to know I am part of it." The child nods, not fully understanding, but smiles. Adventure Time's universe has always been one of flux. Everything that lives must change. For Lemongrab, chaos returning is not regression, but renewal. His empathy is tested, yes, but it also deepens. He learns that love does not mean control, and peace does not mean stillness. It means staying kind through movement. It means holding one's balance as the ground shifts. The days become brighter, stranger. Sometimes, the lemon people's new inventions fail spectacularly. One explodes, showering syrup across the courtyard. Lemongrab stands covered in it, blinking through the sticky haze. The crowd gasps, waiting for the inevitable shriek. Instead, he bursts into laughter, raw, awkward, contagious. The sound ripples through the crowd until everyone is laughing with him. For the first time, his voice, once a weapon, becomes joy. When the laughter fades, he looks around at his kingdom, messy, unpredictable, alive, and feels something larger than pride. He feels belonging. The chaos has returned, but this time it has not come to devour him. It has come to teach him how to dance. That night, Lemongrab walks alone to his garden. The flowers have overgrown the paths, twisting in every direction. He kneels, touches the soil, and whispers, "You are loud, but you are alive." He can hear the rustling leaves, the humming insects, the distant chatter of his people. The noise fills him until there is no boundary between him and the world. He looks up at the cracked towers of his castle, glowing under the moonlight. The wind passes through them, producing a soft, trembling hum. It is imperfect, unstable, unpredictable. It is music. Lemongrab closes his eyes, listening. The sound is chaos. The sound is life. The sound is fine. The kingdom hums with life now. It sounds layered and restless. The air carries the hum of work and play, of laughter, of wind sweeping through the cracks of the old castle. Yet beneath all this noise, a softer sound remains, the faint echo of what once was. The past does not leave easily. It lingers in corners, in the way the walls sigh at night, in the way Lemongrab sometimes pauses mid-step, unsure of where a memory ends and the present begins. He has learned to live gently, but the past still visits him. It comes without warning, slipping between the sounds of his new life. Sometimes, while tending the garden, he will catch the scent of burnt sugar and remember the loneliness of his earlier years, the long corridors where only his voice existed. Other times, the reflection of light on a window will remind him of his creator's gaze, distant, assessing, a gaze that once defined his worth. These memories no longer crush him, but they do not comfort him either. They simply are. They belong to him as much as the peace he has built. He begins to understand that redemption is not the erasure of the past. It is its echo softened by time. The past does not vanish. It transforms, fading into resonance. Each action of kindness he performs does not undo what came before. It adds to it a counterpoint that changes the melody. The echoes of his cruelty remain, but their edges dull as new sounds overlap them. Where once there was screaming, there is now music. Where once there was silence, there is the rustling of growth. Still, the echo calls to him. He sometimes walks through the old, unused halls of his castle, where the lemon people rarely go. The air there is heavier, thicker with memory. He runs his hand along the cold walls, tracing grooves left by years of pounding fists and angry footsteps. In those moments, he does not flinch from what he was. He looks at it, and for once, he does not turn away. The emptiness that once defined these rooms now feels like space for breath. The castle remembers, but it forgives him in its own way. He notices that his people have changed too. They no longer move with the same careful, frightened rhythm. Their steps are lighter, their laughter quicker. Yet even in their freedom, they carry faint traces of the old fear, like a shadow that follows them at a distance. It will take generations for that shadow to fade completely. Lemongrab accepts this. Healing does not erase the scar, it teaches one to live with it. One afternoon, he sits in the garden, watching the lemon people work. They are planting new rows of vines, arranging them with no pattern at all. The air smells of citrus and soil. He closes his eyes and listens. Beneath the living noise of the present, he can still hear the faint echoes of his past self. The shrill voice, the endless declarations, the brittle order. But now those echoes no longer sound like pain. They sound like lessons. The noise that once destroyed him has become the foundation of everything that grew after. He begins to think of the echo not as something to silence, but as something to harmonize with. When he feels anger rising, when the old noise trembles in his chest, he does not fight it. He breathes through it, letting it pass like a wave. The echo reminds him of what he has overcome, and what he could still become again if he forgets to listen. It keeps him humble. At night, he often stands by the open window, watching the moonlight catch the edges of the castle's cracks. The light bends in uneven ways, forming delicate patterns across the floor. The imperfections turn the stone into something living. He thinks of how much time he once spent trying to erase every flaw, and how those very flaws now create beauty. The echo of the past does not haunt him in this light. It hums quietly, like a companion that no longer needs to shout to be heard. The Lemon people sometimes tell stories about the early days of their kingdom, dark, strange stories of the time, when fear ruled their lives. Lemongrab listens to them without interruption. The stories hurt, but he knows they are true. He lets them be told, because the telling of pain is part of healing it. Each retelling makes the story less heavy, less final. Over time, the stories change shape. The fear becomes wonder, the cruelty becomes legend, and even his worst moments are retold with strange tenderness. The past has softened into myth. Lemongrab walks among his people as they laugh and sing, their lives intertwined with his in ways neither could have imagined. Every sound they make carries a trace of what came before, and that trace gives their joy weight. The laughter means something precisely because of the silence that once filled these halls. The world is not healed despite the past, but because of it. The echo gives the present depth. As night falls, he stands once more on his balcony. The wind carries faint sounds from the fields, the murmur of voices, the buzz of life, the shifting rhythm of a living world. Somewhere beneath it all, faint but steady, he can still hear himself, the old voice, the one that screamed into emptiness. It no longer frightens him. It is not a curse, not a ghost, but a memory of someone who was learning how to exist. He listens to it the way one listens to the sea, aware that every wave that crashes has already become part of the tide. The echo of the past remains, as it always will, but it no longer demands silence. It folds gently into the present, shaping the air without ruling it. It reminds him that every moment of peace carries within it a memory of struggle. The two cannot be separated. They define each other. Lemongrab looks out over the fields, his hands resting still at his sides. The wind moves through his hair. The cracks in the castle sing softly in the breeze, and the night hums with life. The past hums with it, not as weight, but as foundation. For the first time, he does not wish it gone. He lets it echo, gentle and endless, until the sound becomes one with everything else. The seasons begin to turn again. The air grows heavier with the scent of ripening fruit, and the castle's walls gleam faintly under the light of a sun that seems softer than before. Change has always frightened Lemongrab, but now it approaches him like an old friend. The noise of the kingdom has deepened, still chaotic, still full of laughter and argument, but calmer beneath the surface, as though the whole land breathes in rhythm. The world no longer revolves around his moods. It moves on its own, and that movement no longer feels like abandonment. It feels like life continuing, with or without his permission. He spends more time in the fields now. The Lemon people work around him, unbothered by his presence. They no longer shrink when he passes. Some wave, some sing. The noise of their living fills him with a quiet awe. He watches them build new homes from stone and glass, their designs uneven and strange, their methods imperfect but full of intention. He does not correct them. He knows that perfection would only drain the warmth from their work. The flaws make it real. Each morning, when he steps outside, he feels the pulse of change beneath his feet. The ground is alive, humming faintly with all the roots and worms and unseen things moving through it. Once, this kind of unpredictability would have driven him into panic. Now it feels like proof that he is part of something larger than himself. He cannot control the soil any more than he can control the hearts of his people. And that realization, instead of terrifying him, brings peace. Still, there are moments when he feels the pull of the old world. Sometimes, late at night, the castle grows too quiet, and the silence feels like the one he used to know, empty, cold, waiting for the sound of his own scream to fill it. When that happens, he steps outside and listens to the night instead of his thoughts. There are sounds everywhere, leaves brushing together, insects clicking, wind sighing through the broken towers. The world hums gently to remind him that silence is never absolute. There is always something moving, something growing, even when he cannot see it. The lemon people have changed as much as their ruler. They are no longer merely reflections of him. Their faces show new expressions. Their voices carry new tones. Some are bold, others curious, some even defiant. Their individuality no longer threatens him. He recognizes in them what he once could not accept in himself: difference as a form of beauty. They live not because of his control, but because he finally allowed them to. Watching them live, he learns to do the same. Change reaches him slowly, through the body first. His hands tremble less now. His posture, once rigid, has softened. The furrow in his brow that never left his face begins to fade. The sharpness in his eyes has become clarity. He looks older, worn, but alive. When he walks, he no longer tries to command attention. He walks to feel the air, to listen, to exist quietly among others. For a being once defined by noise, that quiet presence is his greatest transformation. One day, as he tends his garden, he notices that the plants have grown beyond his care. Vines reach over walls, branches twist toward light. The garden no longer looks like something made. It looks like something born. It has outgrown the boundaries he set for it, and that realization fills him with strange pride. He understands that everything he has built must someday exceed him. Even his people, even his legacy, must move beyond his hands. The thought no longer hurts. It soothes him. The world around him changes, and he changes with it. The air grows cooler, the nights longer, and the sky above the Lemon Kingdom deepens into a shade he has never noticed before, a colour that seems to contain both dusk and dawn. He begins to see change not as a disruption, but as continuity, a rhythm that carries everything forward. The castle shifts in tone, the laughter changes pitch, even the wind seems to sing differently, yet it is all part of one unbroken song. He starts to help the lemon people with their projects. They ask for his guidance, but not his permission. He lifts heavy stones, holds beams steady, listens to their ideas. His movements are awkward, but sincere. They correct him when he fumbles, and he accepts correction easily. Each shared act builds a rhythm between them. Work becomes a kind of music, the sound of hammers, footsteps, laughter, and breath joining together. The kingdom that once moved to the beat of his anger now moves to the pulse of collaboration. As the day ends, Lemongrab often stands at the edge of the fields, watching the sun fade. The light spills over everything, the castle, the vines, the people, and turns it all to gold. The sight fills him with an emotion he has no word for, something between sorrow and wonder. He realizes that everything beautiful carries both. Nothing perfect lasts, and that impermanence is what makes it precious. Change, he finally understands, is not an enemy of peace, but its continuation. The stillness he once craved was a kind of death. The movement he once feared is what keeps the world alive. The chaos that frightened him has become music. The noise that overwhelmed him has become harmony. The echoes of his past have folded into the melody of the present, and the song continues even when he does not add to it. As night falls, the sounds of the kingdom blend together, the laughter, the rustling leaves, the faint hum of wind through broken glass. Lemongrab listens to it all and feels no urge to fix or direct any of it. The world no longer needs to be perfect, it only needs to be alive. He stands there as darkness settles and the stars appear, scattered and uneven, each one slightly flawed but shining together. The cracks in the castle reflect their light, turning ruin into constellation. The air vibrates softly with the sound of change. Lemongrab breathes it in and lets it stay. The noise does not belong to him anymore. It never did. It belongs to everything. The story of Lemongrab does not end with triumph. It ends with continuity. His redemption is not a single act, not a sudden awakening, but the slow unfolding of a being who has learned to live with himself. The world he once ruled through fear now exists in quiet balance, and that balance is not perfect. It trembles, shifts, breathes. It changes as he changes. The kingdom and its ruler have learned the same truth, that peace is not a destination, but a practice renewed each day. He wakes early each morning, before the lemon people stir. The sky is pale and damp, the air thick with scent of fruit and dew. He walks through the castle in silence, tracing the paths he once marched as a tyrant. The walls remember his old voice, yet they no longer echo it. They hold its absence instead, and that absence feels full. In the garden, the vines sprawl in every direction. He tends to them with a gentleness that once would have been unthinkable. His hands, which once struck and commanded, now nurture. Lemongrab is no longer the loudest presence in his own world. The lemon people speak freely now, their laughter moving through the halls like a breeze. Their songs mix with the sounds of work and the hum of the wind, forming a rhythm that never stops. He listens, not to command, but to understand. Sometimes he joins them, his awkward hum blending into their melodies. His voice no longer needs to be right, it only needs to belong. He carries his past with him like a scar, visible, unhidden. He remembers the fear, the control, the loneliness, but he no longer runs from it. Each memory, even the cruel ones, has become part of his understanding. Redemption has not erased what he was. It has made space for it. His forgiveness of himself is not absolution. It is acknowledgement. He knows that he was unkind, that he caused harm. He knows that what was broken cannot be undone. But he also knows that life continued, that his people survived him, that he has learned to listen. The lemon. People no longer tell his story as tragedy. They tell it as transformation. They remember the cruelty, but they also remember the change, the moment when their ruler began to bend instead of break. Their stories soften him every time he hears them. He sees himself through their words, not as a monster, but as someone who struggled and learned. Their retelling becomes his immortality, not as perfection, but as growth. There are still moments when fear returns, the old instinct to control, the sharp edge of panic, the memory of silence pressing against his ribs. But when those moments come, he no longer screams. he breathes through them. He listens for the sounds outside himself, the voices of his people, the hum of life, the beating of his own heart, and the fear passes. The noise that once tortured him now steadies him. Lemongrab's redemption lies not in what he gains, but in what he releases. He lets go of control, of the need to be right, of the illusion that perfection means safety. He accepts that life will always be uneven. He accepts that love cannot be commanded. He accepts that sound will always exist, that chaos and harmony are two sides of the same truth. And in that acceptance, he finds something close to grace. The castle, once a monument to his fear, has become a living memory. Vines cover the stone, flowers bloom in every colour. The cracks are no longer flaws, they are stories. Through them, the wind moves freely, carrying laughter and scent, and the faint buzz of insects. The kingdom is alive in ways he never imagined it could be. He does not see it as his creation anymore. It is its own being now, shaped by every voice that inhabits it. As he walks through the fields, he notices how time has changed everything. The Lemon People's children run through the gardens where he once shouted for silence. The air vibrates with new beginnings, with futures that will not remember his tyranny firsthand. He feels no need to remind them. The best legacy, he realizes, is one that does not depend on being remembered. The world does not need to know his story to carry its lessons. The sound of kindness, once rare here, will continue without him. When the sun sets, he stands alone on the balcony. The horizon glows orange and pink, colours bleeding into one another without borders. The light falls across his face, warm and fleeting. He feels the pulse of the world beneath his feet, the footsteps of his people, the rustling of plants, the distant song that rises every evening. The castle hums softly, alive. The noise of life has become the quiet he once searched for. He does not think of himself as redeemed. The word feels too final, too complete. He thinks of himself as learning. The process has no end. Redemption, he understands now, is not a crown to wear, but a way to walk. It is the act of moving forward with gentleness, even when the past still echoes behind. It is choosing, every day, to stay kind in a world that remains imperfect. The stars appear one by one. Their reflections shimmer in the cracks of the castle's glass. He looks out across the Lemon Kingdom, messy, bright, alive, and feels gratitude without knowing what to call it. The noise of his people drifts upward, distant and harmonious. It fills him completely. The sound is not his, but it moves through him like breath. He stands there until night fully arrives, the air cool and alive around him. The wind moves through the castle, through the fields, through him. The world hums, uneven and eternal. The kingdom sings its strange, endless song, and Lemongrab, once the loudest voice in Oo, listens. The sound rises, then settles into stillness. It is not silence, it is life continuing. It is peace earned, not by perfection, but by presence. It is the sound of forgiveness made real. It is the sound of Lemongrab finally at rest.